There are two news stories today that I am finding impossible to turn away from. As I record this just after noon on April 7th, 2026, President Trump has set 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time as a deadline to reach a deal with the Iranians concerning the war in Iran and, more specifically, the Strait of Hormuz. If a deal is not reached, President Trump has said that the whole civilization will die and has outlined exactly what that will look like in the destruction of bridges and power plants and so forth. The other news story that really catches my attention is the return of the astronauts on the Artemis II after their mission around the moon. And the reason these two capture my attention perhaps comes out of the era in which I grew up. It seems to me we've been here before. A long time ago, there was an era known as the 1980s. And in that era, there was the fear of annihilation, of destruction. During the Cold War, there was a great deal of fear that war between the United States and the Soviet Union would lead to nuclear destruction. And there was a lot of genuine concern about war with the Soviet Union and the destruction of the world through that nuclear war. At the same time, people were almost obsessed with the year 2000, of what the world would look like in the year 2000 as we turn to the new century, particularly around technology, computers, cell phones, the things that were so new back in that era and just emerging as something brand new in society and what that would mean by the year 2000. There was an optimism of what life could be. And I think that was a holdover from perhaps the enthusiasm of the 1950s after World War II, and evil had been defeated and the United States was thriving. And people used to dream of flying cars and all the technology that would be part of our lives by the year 2000. Now we are some 40 years removed from that. And a lot of people, perhaps, that didn't live through that era don't even know about the fear that people experienced, the concern about nuclear war of that era, of complete annihilation with war with the Soviet Union. It's something that maybe has been lost to the current generations because it never actually happened. It was something we feared, but it didn't actually happen. What did happen was the emergence of computer technology, cell phone technology, and a number of other things that were dreamed of back in the 70s and 80s. And did that make life perfect? No, it brought its own measure of blessings and curses, but it did emerge. And it is something that we live with every day now. And so now we're at another crossroads where we have talk of destroying entire cultures, where we have fear of what could be if war continues to expand. But we also have the intrigue of what could be in the future, of what missions like Artemis II could lead to as we continue to explore the moon and the planets and all the things there are to explore in this universe. So in 40, 50 years from now, which will be more remembered? The concern that we have about war and destruction and civilizations being annihilated? Or will they remember Artemis II being the beginning of new adventures and new advancements as human beings? We did avoid nuclear war in the Cold War, and we did emerge into the age of technology. And I join with many hoping that we can do it again, that historians will look back on this time and not remember destruction of civilizations, but will remember the emergence of Artemis II and what that began and what they live in that era, emerging into those new ways of life that will have their own set of blessings and curses. And maybe I'm just idealistic enough to think that all of us can play a role in that in perhaps very small ways in the choices we make. This show is about looking at the news through a lens of compassion, connection, decency, and love. If we live life that way, even in our small ways, maybe that's enough that we can help do our part to not live into our worst fears, but to emerge into our best optimism. I think that's worth a try. And that's today's insight.